set my
Yeah.
phone to make sure I didn't oversleep.
Well, I'm going to call you back.
I got knocked out.
We had a wonderful time thinking about articulation with K-12, the issues as we face as working together, collaborating together for STEM education across the K-20 spectrum. So we're going to have some time this afternoon to work in breakout groups again to talk in more depth about the issues that were raised and how centers might address those issues. So our discussion questions are, what are the gaps in STEM education that centers can address? In what ways are centers successfully interfacing with the K-12 educational system? What are your challenges to successful collaboration? And in what ways might we improve K-12 and higher education articulation for STEM education? So again, we're going to break out into groups. You should have on your name tag E, F, G, or H. If you are missing, if you do not have a letter and a number, then join a group that has fewer people. Again, and I forgot to put numbers on these, but these aren't questions 1 to 4. So we're going to break into the 4 groups. Each group has a sheet with an assigned order to discuss the questions because we know that not all groups will get to all of the questions. And please record again your responses on separate sheets of paper, and please put your group letter on your responses so we know where they came from. After an hour, we're going to jigsaw into the 4 topic groups, 5, 6, 7, and 8, and each group will prepare a summarized report to come and present to the whole group. And there are facilitator assignments on the sheets that will be on the tables just like before. You'll need a large paper recorder for the first group, a set of groups, and a recorder for the other groups. And as before, we'll have E and F in this room, and G and H in the next room. Any questions? All right. Please break up into groups. I look forward to another set of stimulating conversations. So I know we've had very stimulating discussions. I want to just take a moment to introduce Gwen Allen, who's a program coordinator. Gwen, would you, with the Utah Center for Science and Math Education, and Gwen has been able to get over here now, so we just wanted to introduce her. Hello. And so we're going to start with question 5, which some of you may have had as question 1, but whatever. So we'll have 5 minutes for your presentations. It'll be timed and just a few minutes for discussion.
You'll stay close by her. I only did this on the condition that I had help, and Larry doesn't know it yet, but we'll probably call on him too. Okay, and I suppose I need the podium. Oh, podiums make me nervous. I like talking and walking around. Okay, so our question was about gaps to be addressed, and we talked about ways in which centers, there's sort of both challenges that we have, and there are things that we think that we have some success at doing. But one of the gaps is providing authentic research experiences to K-12 teachers and students. And so here's where Larry came in and talked about the value of having a scientist come in and talk about some real cutting-edge research that's going on in the field, and then conveying that to the students and the teachers in a K-12 setting. And that covers a lot of territory. It can help motivate students, and through that experience, there can be some role models. You can provide some mentoring through those experiences. And so that kind of leads into the next part with collaboration and mentors. And we didn't want to restrict mentors to academia. We thought of people in industrial settings, in STEM settings in the industry. They can be mentors and make contacts with K-12 students and teachers as well, to really provide some real world connections to what's going on in STEM. All right, any comments from two of you?
Well said.
Oh, okay. Okay, and then we talked about the center can play the role of helping K-12 educators and university faculty understand the gap between what might happen with the education students leave with from their K-12 setting and what the expectations are when they arrive at the university. Also, there can be gaps between what students graduate with, the knowledge and the skills that they have upon graduation, and what's required of them in their career. And so we thought the center can play a role in communicating what kind of things need to happen to bridge those gaps. Then, let's see, and then promoting teaching as a profession. That was not something my group originally discussed, but we thought that was important to that can be one of our jobs, is to promote teaching as a really good profession to get into, and not sort of direct the best and brightest elsewhere, saying that they want to do something else. And then one that's important, especially in light of the new standards that have come out already in mathematics, but the next generation standards that are hopefully going to be on the table, that they bring in a new set of expectations that the teachers place upon the teacher, and then also what the teachers need to be able to expect of their students. We're raising the expectations of their students, and the centers can help make sure that teachers are equipped to address those expectations. Because I think there is a gap in many places between what teachers are doing now and what they're going to have to do to make sure that their students are successful with whatever new assessments come as a result of the new standards. And did I miss anything there? You want to add anything? Okay, you're not being very helpful.
You did a good job.
Okay, and then I don't know that we have solutions for this, but we talked about the gaps between, I just have the word assessment up here, between the way that students are assessed in terms of content knowledge and what we really want students to learn in our classes. And so, for example, we talked about critical thinking skills. That's something we really want students to learn in our classes, but that doesn't necessarily appear on the assessment. And so there's a gap between our goals sometimes, what we want students to achieve in our classes, and what assessments will measure. And we thought that might be something centers can work to address. Okay, so, and I still have, what, 30 seconds left?
Any discussion, thoughts to add? It's later in the afternoon.
See, you did the job.
Let's go on to the next question.
Was in what ways are centers successfully interfacing with the K-12 educational system? So I can probably summarize this by saying we are successfully addressing all the gaps listed in number 5 that just went previous to us. So this is kind of a re-articulation of those points, so I'll go through it pretty quickly. In terms of the interface with K-12, looking at curriculum development is definitely something that the centers are succeeding in terms of the creation of curriculum, knowing and developing relationships with everyone in the K-12 community, stretching from school boards, administrators, all the way down to teachers and coaches, and having those relationships then grow into partnerships. pedagogical content knowledge, application, and support. We have NSTA presentations on there. It's just kind of an example of a way that centers can facilitate master teachers in terms of having a greater impact on the professional communities. Mutual respect with partners, including data collection and using it for evaluating purposes. So when you're engaging with the different K through 12 entities, working together and making sure that both individuals are participating in the creation of projects, kind of builds mutual respect within the education community. Helping underrepresented students, helping students reach balance in their lives. So that was a discussion that another group had regarding having to have a balance between offering STEM programming but recognizing that students have other interests in their lives such as coaching and sports and different things. And so the center was actually the one who was helping kind of facilitate some of those conversations to make sure that both programs could exist. Professional development, which has been articulated, utilizing retired science teachers or scientists and engineers trained in the classroom, K through 12 arena. Aligning programs with standards and curriculum needs, we kind of addressed that. Science and engineering fairs is, I think, a big place where centers have a role with K through 12 in terms of providing not just expertise, but a lot of times facilities and organization that's necessary to host some of those larger scale events. Broadening department reach on campus. Specifically, we talked about the idea of a lot of research grants having the broader impacts piece and having a lot of scientists potentially on campus who are looking to have that broader impacts, and centers really serve that role as helping those scientists find ways to have that integration in a positive and productive way. Involving community, like I said, I think West Virginia has really highlighted that really well with a lot of the programs they've spoken about. And then utilizing summer bridge programs, last week of school, different pieces to kind of facilitate some of the challenges that the current educational calendar presents. Questions?
Any discussion? We're getting some very thorough presentations. Thank you. Question 7 about challenges.
All right. So challenges, representing synthesis group. Here are our challenges. Everything's good. This is to represent both challenges to sustainability. Okay, challenges to reading. So we found 4 general categories of, well, we're not sure what these categories are, but themes that emerged along the way in terms of challenges along the way. Cultural differences here in partnerships, both within institutions of higher education and between institutions of higher education and the K-12 communities, both formal and informal along the way. Issues of continuity, mechanics, and scale. And these are, of course, as any good sociocultural researcher will know, these are all linked and driving one another. Or if you're a mathematician, these are bijective relationships. So in terms of cultural differences, we found big issues like turf, this idea of silos, the idea of developing mutual respect, expectations, and then reward structures within systems to support this idea of collaborative work along the way. Each of those poses challenge, and each of those derives from challenges of cultural difference. In terms of continuity, there was continuity of people in 2 forms. Here, both in leadership positions, that if you lack sort of people to connect with along the way, but then also continuity of participants and retention along the way. But then there was also continuity of programming and programmatic efforts, which is in fact linked to continuity of funding, so that NSF is continually interested in identifying new solutions. The continuity of language and goals, and making sure that language and goals, and many of these actually can be reduced not only to continuity, but this idea of brittleness, that unless you have a couple of people deep within the system or layering, we face tremendous challenges here, so that you can build, it takes 8 years to build up a program and 1 year of lack of funding to kill it, at least to push back for another several years. In terms of the mechanics, often undersold and not externalized, but the hidden cost of communication, it costs time and money for people to get together and to coordinate and communicate. We act as though communication is free. Advertising, time for people to participate along the way. Mechanics of scheduling, to partner between the university system and K-12, for instance, were completely different schedules. And then also the mechanics of funding, again, comes across that. And then in our sort of kibitzing session afterwards, we recognized, there's also lots of challenges of coordination around issues of scale. And there are many, and the scale I find a tremendously powerful theme in a bunch of ways. But there's scale of time frame, because we operate at different time frames by what counts for getting something done. I mean, of course, if we're politicians, it's quarterly. If we're in business, it's quarterly profits. If it's politicians, maybe an annual cycle to get elected. Anyway, we can talk about that, but also there are time frames by which it takes 3 years to demonstrate the impact of a professional development program, for the seeds even to take root, and 20 years for us to see the impact largely on lives here. But then there's also coordination across scales of the system. Are we impacting individuals, programs, institutions along the way? And so those are different scales of the system. And then there's also the size of the problems that we're trying to address here, which are both at massive scales, but then also dealing with the lives of individuals. So, and you see each of those are of course tied straight up here with cultural trajectories and the rest of it. And I'm going to see the rest of my time for questions and discussion.
Any additional thoughts?
Yes, there is a line up and down here, it's just implicit. Cheap pens.
So now, are you implying that there are really connections both ways among all of those?
Oh, I think so. I mean, this is sort of.
Is that what the one you're trying to put in?
Yes, I mean, absolutely. This issue of scale is a challenge of cultural trajectory here, no question about it. That said, I mean, with a little bit more reflection on it in time, I think we might come up with slightly different categorization schemes, and we could apply all kinds of issues here to suggest, for instance, that higher education and K-12 participate in different activity systems. If you wanted to take an activity theoretic framing for this and see roles, rules, divisions are different. But anyway, this seems to work for right now. Yeah.
There's also sort of that power differential, is whenever I walk in and you're asked if they would like to partner with Washington University in our region, they have to say yes. So, it would be really not to their advantage in the community to say no. And so, the authenticity of the partnership, you have to work hard to get under and make sure that you're really aligned and that your values are aligned and that you think about hierarchy whenever you have that power differential.
Absolutely. I'm very sensitive as a physicist whenever I walk into a chemistry department. I'm kidding. But absolutely, and this definitely goes under cultural difference here in terms of that, as well as also this idea of communication here.
And the timing is like urgency, like the schools really need it today.
Right.
And all of our universities want to see a model. So is that.
Right.
Well, even on grant proposals, because if people are not used to working on the time frame of grant proposals, understanding, well, we put it in now, and we may hear in 9 months, we might get some idea about funding that might begin a year from now. It's really difficult for people who don't operate in that world to understand. It's really challenging. I run into that a lot.
Then we implement it, so 4 years from now.
Yeah, by then there are going to be new national standards out, right? So, yes.
Well, I don't know if this is
like at Cornell, there are lots of centers, like for nanotechnology and for material science and all that, and they all have outreach, and they all go to the same schools looking to do outreach, and the schools say, go away, you know,
Right.
So building those bridges effectively, there's no one central place on campus that's doing that.
Right. I think it would be very, very, very valuable to do that. And to me, that's split between this idea that we're built into silos. That's the structure of the cultural systems that we have as these centers. And at the same time, the hidden cost of communication, which is those centers would benefit from. This is why I thought the NSF IQ program, for instance, which was recently canceled, was brilliant, either accidentally or intentionally. But they thought, wait a sec, if we're giving you all this money, let's see what happens if we give you some money to talk to all the different programs that are doing this.
And by the way, in the centers, when they talk to the schools before they do it, I know that they.
They do, it's just not coordinated, I mean, there's a STEM coordinator, or outreach coordinator group on campus that has like 45 people. So there's a lot, all I'm saying is there are a lot of different groups doing outreach, but it's not going through one center. And so that can be confusing for the schools.
Well, talking to them too much, you know, really getting them involved in something that has like a 5% chance of getting funded. I also feel bad about taking up their time.
Right. That's the other challenge.
Yeah. They don't understand quite well.
Well, it's building that collaboration community for understanding that process.
What I particularly like about this model is that it addresses some of the things that Nancy and John were saying about the shotgun approach, is that it gives us a map of a way to think about the challenges. And I'm not sure how you would overlay thinking about solutions, but at least it identifies the big problem areas. And but the connections aren't, you know, how do you make those connections? I don't know. Maybe that's from the solution side, but I do like that you don't have to take the shotgun now, maybe you can find a pistol.
Sniper rifle.
So violent our educational solutions here. But isn't that what number 8 is? What are the solutions?
You do.
Well, should we move on?
Facilitate out of that one.
That's right. Should we move on to the final question?
Don't you love how they have stairs, but we all take the most likely to kill someone? Great. Okay, so the articulation piece, we had, like most of you, a lot, and then we tried to shrink. First one, mutual understanding. First little bullet point. Both parties, both the K through 12 entities as well as the systems of higher ed, need to have a mutual understanding about what it means to actually learn a STEM subject. How do we know? And I went to a whole general education conference earlier this year in Louisiana, and it was all about this, you know. How do you know these kids have learned this stuff? And what does it mean when we get a graduate from high school that says that they took calculus? Does that mean that they're ready to go into the higher ed maths from there on out? And we talked about how, I think it was you who said a parent was mad at you because you had a student that had taken calc in a community college, and then when they got to the four-year institution, they were not prepared and failing, and so the parent thought it was the problem of the four-year institution. That, you know, somehow you have to make sure that both public ed and higher ed are aiming at the same point. You know, that the K-12 is, that their ending point is higher ed's beginning point. And when those two get off, that's when you see all these bridge programs popping up. And maybe that is a measure of our success as we go home to each of our states and we say, how many bridge programs do our universities offer? And why is that the case? And then is a system of public ed and higher ed, we get together and say, how do we rectify this? So somehow we got to get on the same page. B, in our first group, we addressed program structure about how some students, when they come into the system of higher ed, they encounter this lull in the curriculum to where it's really easy. I can't remember who said this, but they're like, oh yeah, they get in and the business classes were really fun and they were easy. And the people who got into, let's say, biology, it was a nightmare, and almost as if the professors were trying to weed people out. And then it got fun later. So, you know, we need to look at how we structure our programs in higher ed to make sure that we're both encouraging students, but also somehow we keep the rigor in there. But pay attention to how we are structuring it. I would dare say that many of us, if we looked at, I know just in our biology department, biology 1610 is viewed as a weed out class. And you know, are you similarly structured? And if so, why? And is that a good thing? Anyway, go back, talk to your faculty. Also this sense of belonging where you go from kids that are in high school and as they transition into college, we know that that's a very difficult transition. They're away from home. They get to these huge universities, sometimes huge universities, but maybe they're in a course that has 2, 3, even 1,000 students in it. How are they being attached to your school? How are you creating that sense of belonging? And I know that this is a big concern, especially with schools that have low retention rates. What are you doing to help them make a connection to your university? The next one, C, is defining STEM. So we heard about that earlier today. And then also, who is defining this? Who comes up with that definition? And is it state? Is it industry? Is it higher ed? Is it all of them coming together and we make this lovely Venn diagram and then whatever's left in the middle, that's what the definition is? But what sadly is probably taking place is that it's administration who probably have no background in STEM defining what STEM is. And it could be admin at like state Congress level, it could be higher ed, it could be public ed. But who are those people coming up with those definitions? And so what do centers do, or how can they address this? We had share content, share structure, share common language. We said that maybe the NGSS is a great springboard for all of us to get on the same language, with the same set of goals, and get on the same page. And that's what centers can do. So, there you have it. Question?
Any other thoughts?
Nailed it.
Yes?
Actually, a lot of people work on the next generation of science standards as well as the common core mathematics. And those are already experts in went through the national academies and other aspects. So I think those are the people who really are defined. We may disagree. I mean, I'm sure all of us can look at something and say, well, you know, I would like to do this differently. But overall, a lot of people, high quality, and with a lot of work into them.
Yeah,
So,
our concern was that if I went to the average faculty member and said, hey, what do you know about the NGSS stuff?
they don't have, very little. Right, but we do, right? And that's the idea here, that we can play a role even to convince our local governments that this would be great to have common assessments throughout the country if possible. To convince our own states that a lot of work has been done, and nothing convinces me that the state by itself, or whatever, would come up with something better. So why really waste all this energy and not really try to put our energy behind to convince our states that, look, you know, this is worth really thinking about, and this economy of scales. Instead of everybody coming up with their own assessments, wouldn't it be better? Actually, a number of states have gotten a large grant, $175 million for the Common Core math, to come up with something. Isn't that a better way for us to assess if all of us in different states are doing a decent job? We just want to compare ourselves to ourselves. I mean, that's really what we're doing. We're hiding behind our figure. I think that maybe our centers can play a more aggressive role to convince the powers that make those decisions in our individual states to say, look, let's do it by ourselves. We don't expect that on the Academy of Sciences. We can improve it, and there's room for improvement. We are allowed to change, I think, 15% or so, add, subtract, whatever, something like this. But I personally think that's a role maybe our centers can play, depending on the state.
Thank you for that kind of wrap-up, final thought, which sort of encompasses what is STEM. So I want to thank everyone for their very thoughtful discussions today. We've done a lot of thinking, getting to know each other, thinking about questions that we face as centers, as we face as working across the K-20 spectrum. One thing I want to add, a couple things, housekeeping things I'd like to ask. One, on the sheets that are the summary sheets, whoever did those, would you just mind writing summary on those so that it's really clear that those are the summary sheets? I'd really appreciate that. Two, I have a feeling that the notes we have from the groups are on the paper. And if anyone did take any notes on their laptop or on paper that we can photocopy, please share those with Emily, who's at the registration desk. We can certainly photocopy notes and give them back to you if you'd like to do that. I'm not sure that happened anywhere when I kind of went around, but if it did, we'd like to capture those notes also, because we do have a lot of nice notes on the big paper, and I thank everyone for all their big paper notes. So I found it really useful to have big paper notes at conferences to capture discussions right in the moment. So in preparing for tomorrow, there are some, let's see, I think there are 4x6 cards on your tables. And somewhere on your tables you should find some cards. I think, yes, they're 4x6 cards, as opposed to 3x5 cards. So first I'd like you to, there are two things I'd like you to think about. See if you can hold these in your head. One, I'd like you to write on your card 2 topics that you would like to discuss tomorrow morning. And we'd like, so there's an opportunity to have breakouts that are really focused on topics that have arisen in your minds that you would like to discuss with other people. And we'd like those breakout sessions to think about moving forward, the future, what might come out of this conference. Nalini has suggested several possible topics. A white paper that might come out, a large conference next year, a database of contacts, projects, and funding sources, perhaps some people that might work together as an advisory group to think how to move forward from this conference, media pieces and papers in venues such as the Chronicle of Higher Education, etc. I've also heard people talking about the possibility of developing assessment instruments that would be used in multiple programs. So there are other topics that I'm sure have come up that you might like to get together with a group tomorrow to discuss. So 2 topics that you would like to discuss with other people thinking about next steps. So that's 1 card. The other piece is that we have a wonderful panel discussion this evening with representatives from high school up through K-12, through the university administration, and on to the business community. And so a second card is one question you would like to have to address that panel to address. So those 2 things. After that, we do have a reception out in the hallway, and dinner will be at 6 o'clock. So, yes. So for the plenary, for the panel discussion this evening, a question that you would like the panel to address. So the 2 things I'm asking on 1 card, what are 2 topics you would like to address with people tomorrow, thinking forward to next steps, and 2, question for the panel this evening. I know I'm giving you 2 tasks at once. 2 separate cards. 2 cards. It's the end of the day. So you can just put your cards on the table right by the back there so we can collect them there. Again, thank you everyone for the wonderful, fruitful discussions today. We look forward to continuing these tonight and tomorrow.